They laughed at me the moment I raised my glass. My ex-wife whispered it was a fluke, but they had no idea I had already won twice. The room shimmered with crystal chandeliers, the soft clink of champagne punctuating bursts of laughter, yet her words cut through the celebration like a knife. Total fluke, she said, leaning against the mahogany bar, her smile a mix of charm and malice. Around us, subtle nods and exchanged glances confirmed the betrayal. Whispers floated like shadows over polished floors. My chest tightened, and in the inner pocket of my jacket rested the crumpled $42,000 check, my hidden victory proof they couldn't see. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I stepped aside near the Grand Bay window overlooking Elliott Bay. March drizzle painted the city in silver streaks, blending with reflections of party lights on the water. I smoothed the check against my chest, underlining the date in faint ink, March 17th, 2025. Every detail mattered: the bank, the signature, the amount, every mark a cornerstone for the plan forming silently in my mind. This paper wasn't just currency, it was leverage, a quiet weapon against public humiliation. Her laughter rang again, a delicate yet vicious note. I caught fragments of conversation, targeted jabs meant for me. "Did you notice Mateo trying to hide that grin?" One friend whispered, voice tight, barely audible. Humiliation stung, but I swallowed it deliberately. Any outward reaction would validate her narrative. I needed patience, observation, and meticulous strategy. The party moved like a slow river. I overheard her arranging whispers with a well-placed ally, plotting to discredit my recent win. "We need to make sure everyone knows this was luck," she said, eyes glinting with calculation. Luck, fluke, accidental. The words settled in my mind like seeds. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was professional, social, and financial. Every smile she offered carried hidden barbs, every laugh a veiled threat to my credibility. I retreated to a quiet corner near the piano, letting the soft notes absorb the tension around me. I watched her, noting posture, gestures, and the subtle alignment of her social allies. Every nuance could become leverage, every fleeting expression, a piece of the puzzle. My phone stayed discreetly hidden. At 9:47 p.m., I texted my private investigator. Observation: ex-wife escalating narrative. Confirmed whispers at bar near east window. Document for ledger. Moments later, a reply confirmed the conversation, typed verbatim from her end, complete with approximate timestamps. The ledger was alive. I couldn't act openly. Any display of anger or frustration would only fuel her perception of my incompetence. Instead, I sipped champagne slowly, letting the bite of carbonation echo the taste of betrayal. Friends laughed, unaware of the tension threading through the air. I catalogued every glance, every subtle shift in seating, every side-eye exchanged across trays of hors d'oeuvres. These seemingly mundane details would later become strategic advantage. Near the dessert table, I noticed her checking her phone with that sly, self-assured smirk. My ex-wife, 45, still radiated charm masking cunning intent. I edged behind a potted ficus, straining to catch fragments of her messages. A half-sent email to a board associate appeared on her screen, hinting at discrediting my recent project. Words subtle, careful, almost casual, but the intent unmistakable. Betrayal wasn't just spoken, it was documented. The device: a black Galaxy S21, time 10:12 p.m., March 17th. These minute details, catalogued now, would later be concrete proof in the ledger I was building. As the clock approached 11, the energy shifted. Guests drifted toward coats and taxis, but the tension lingered. I lingered near the exit, noting final interactions, subtle touches with influential friends, discreet smiles masking judgment. Every observation catalogued mentally, backed by evidence my PI would later gather: receipts, photos, timestamps, recordings. Betrayal had been documented in both memory and ledger. Outside, the rain kissed my face as I walked alone along Elliott Avenue. The sting of her words mixed with the sharp, cool air. My mind replayed the party, dissecting every laugh, every glance, every fluke that had echoed in my ears. This wasn't about pride. It was about legacy, credibility, and justice. My $42,000 check, tangible proof of foresight and strategy, rested safely in my pocket. Her mockery, public and cutting, had only honed my focus. Observation, recording, and calculated action would be my tools. Each step, lawful and precise, would turn humiliation into undeniable vindication. I reached my car beneath the halo of a street lamp, slipped the check into the glove compartment, and let the rain's rhythm match the cadence of my thoughts. Steady, deliberate, unyielding, March 17th, 2025, was not an ending but the seed. A seed of strategy, patience, and lawful cunning. Betrayal had been revealed publicly and sharply, but I felt no panic, only clarity. Every revelation had its time, every move its stage. By the time I drove home, the city blurred through rain-streaked windows. Neon reflections mingled with thoughts of receipts, ledgers, subtle maneuvers. The victory party was over, but the game had only begun. And in the quiet of my apartment overlooking the bay, I allowed myself a private, knowing smile. The fluke they mocked was already becoming a masterstroke they would never anticipate. After the party, the apartment overlooking Elliott Bay felt like a sanctuary and a trap at the same time. The city lights glimmered through the rain-streaked windows, soft reflections on the polished wood floor, yet the sting of public humiliation lingered in my chest like a dull throb. I poured a glass of whiskey, letting the amber liquid catch the light, and set the crumpled $42,000 check beside me on the coffee table. It was a small but tangible victory, one that contrasted sharply with the mockery I had endured hours earlier. I spread the receipts across the table, hidden transfers, overlooked payments, and mismanaged invoices. One in particular caught my eye, a $3,200 payment mistakenly deposited to an obsolete account. The date March 3rd, 2025. The ledger was slowly growing into a story, and this overlooked thread would become my first line of action. I traced each number with my finger, as though physically connecting the dots in a map only I could see. This was about more than money. It was legacy, pride, and a public affirmation that I would not be undermined. Sleep eluded me. The apartment, usually a refuge, now became a theater of replayed humiliation. Every detail from the party cycled through my mind. Her smile as she whispered fluke, the friends' quick nods, the subtle shifts in seating, the way they exchanged glances over hors d'oeuvres. I recalled her nearly imperceptible text messages, her half-sent emails, all pieces of the betrayal. I felt the old ache, a mix of anger and wounded pride, but also a quiet determination. This was no impulsive revenge. It had to be patient, lawful, strategic. I opened the laptop I had set aside for documentation. Emails, bank statements, and screenshots from my PI glowed on the screen. One email showed her correspondence with a corporate associate, timestamped March 17th at 10:12 p.m., the same one I had glimpsed at the party. Another document detailed a bounced $12,600 check, an oversight she would likely try to obscure. I saved each one, meticulously cataloging the folder in chronological order. Every piece mattered, each could be leveraged when the time came. Flashbacks to past betrayals surfaced, family disputes over inheritances, colleagues undermining my proposals, and my ex-wife's repeated social manipulations. Each memory reinforced the stakes. This wasn't just a moment of humiliation, it was a pattern of attempted control. The financial, social, and emotional legacy of my efforts was under threat. But the sting was not enough. Clarity emerged. I had to act, but carefully. Every move needed to build toward indisputable proof and public recognition. I pored over contracts from her recent deals, noting clauses she had violated or overlooked. Dates, amounts, and signatures were highlighted in neon yellow on digital copies. Each breach was a thread I could pull. One minor oversight, a $15,400 transfer missing from the ledger, became a focal point. If I traced it, documented it, and corroborated it with receipts and emails, it would be undeniable evidence of her mismanagement. Every small mistake was a lever. By midnight, the apartment was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater, an occasional distant horn from the city streets. I leaned back, glass in hand, watching the rain smear neon across the bay. My mind dissected the party interactions, her words, and the subtle social jabs. I imagined her reactions as I traced the path of the overlooked payments. The emotional humiliation of the evening now transformed into a blueprint for strategic action. Every sleepless hour reinforced the same lesson: patience was power. Around 2 a.m. Documented a new line in my ledger: March 17th, 2025, 9:47 p.m. Observation of ex-wife plotting narrative with associates, confirmed by PI. Timestamp note: whispers at East Window Bar area. Intent: discredit Mateo's victory. I added the overlooked $3,200 and $15,400 transactions to the same entry, connecting financial missteps to social manipulation. This linkage would later demonstrate motive, pattern, and the scope of her negligence. The next morning, sunlight fractured through the blinds, cutting across the whiskey-stained coffee table and highlighting every crumpled receipt, note, and contract. I arranged them methodically, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The apartment, once quiet and private, had become a command center. My emotional stakes were clear. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about proving foresight, maintaining credibility, and safeguarding my financial and social legacy. I called my legal advisor around 10 a.m., a subtle nod to the plan ahead. "I've got a few discrepancies I need you to review," I said, keeping my voice measured. "Nothing public yet, but I need everything documented. Contracts, transfers, missed payments. We'll need solid evidence if this escalates." The advisor's calm voice reassured me. Step one was in motion: observation, documentation, and validation. Every email, every transfer, every overlooked payment was now being tracked legally and methodically. By evening, I sat by the window again. Elliott Bay stretched before me like a silver canvas. I reflected on the pattern of betrayal, not impulsive acts, but repeated manipulations tied to pride and social leverage. Every small oversight she had made, every misstep at the party, every financial error, it all formed a network of evidence. And in that quiet reflection, clarity emerged. Revenge would not be a public spectacle. It would be a measured, precise orchestration, impossible to dispute. I took the $3,200 payment, traced it back to its original transaction, and noted its path in the ledger. I did the same with the $15,400 transfer, creating digital annotations with timestamps, email confirmations, and receipt copies. By the time the city lights flickered on against the twilight, the groundwork for lawful retaliation was laid. This was more than patience. It was strategy, focus, and preparation. That night, before sleep claimed me, I reviewed every thread: the fluke whispered at the party, the laughter, the glances, the mismanaged transfers, the minor contract oversights. Each element had its place in the unfolding story. Every sleepless hour, every documented discrepancy, every observation was an investment in future vindication. The sting of humiliation had transformed into a quiet, methodical resolve. One day every laugh at my expense would be eclipsed by undeniable proof. The apartment fell silent. The bay shimmered under the March moon. I leaned back, glass in hand, and whispered to myself, almost inaudibly, "Patience, foresight, and law will speak louder than their mockery ever could." March 18th began like any ordinary Wednesday, but for me, ordinary had become a carefully orchestrated illusion. I had adopted my hidden consultant identity, Metcalf Advisory, months ago, but now it became the central instrument in my plan. By day, I maintained my regular routines: emails, phone calls, small meetings under my own name. By night, I immersed myself in the dual life that would eventually unravel the social mockery inflicted at the victory party. The first delivery from my private investigator arrived at 9:12 a.m. Seattle time. Two neatly organized folders, labeled in faint pencil: receipts and transfers and call logs and emails. I slid the receipts from the first folder onto my oak desk. Wire transfers overlooked by her assistant, partial payments, bounced checks. One in particular, a $5,600 deposit misapplied to the wrong account on March 8th, caught my eye immediately. The date was insignificant in isolation, but in sequence it formed part of a larger, undeniable pattern. I highlighted the entry digitally and slipped the physical copy into a manila folder marked confidential. By 11 a.m., the emails from my insider arrived. Small, seemingly insignificant tips, references to mismanaged vendor payments, overlooked contract clauses, subtle internal complaints formed a web I could trace. One email referenced a March 9th miscommunication over a $12,400 transfer. Another detailed an offhand mention of a board associate questioning her judgment. I copied every snippet into my secured folder, each file time-stamped and cross-referenced. Every shred of evidence fed the ledger I had begun on March 17th, expanding the narrative of deliberate oversight or at least gross mismanagement. I almost ran into her the same morning at a mid-tier board meeting. The adrenaline hit my chest like a sudden frost. Sitting under my secret identity, I maintained my calm, observing her from across the room, carefully noting her posture, gestures, and who leaned in to agree with her statements. She spoke confidently about the $28,900 quarterly allocation for the spring initiative, but my insider tips had already revealed her miscalculations. A near recognition moment almost exposed me. She glanced my direction, a fleeting spark of awareness in her eyes, but I was already engrossed in my laptop, pretending to review unrelated metrics. I exhaled quietly. That was a reminder. Every encounter, every boardroom, every casual glance carried risk. Dual identity demanded constant vigilance. March 19th through April 4th became a series of calculated steps, each building on the last. My PI delivered receipts and call recordings, sometimes in small batches, sometimes in bulk, ensuring nothing was overlooked. I cataloged everything, noting where paper copies were stored in locked office drawers, in my home safe in encrypted digital folders. Each detail mattered. Every device used by her, phones, tablets, laptops, was cross-referenced with timestamps and locations. Small lawful investigations like monitoring delivery confirmations, verifying bank deposits, and documenting email headers became daily rituals. Ethical missteps, unintentional or otherwise, began to appear naturally. On March 21st, a bounced $3,200 check from one of her smaller projects arrived at the PI's office. On March 25th, an offhand remark caught during a gala, she suggested publicly that my success had been lucky timing. Every minor error, every flippant comment, every overlooked payment formed another thread of evidence. I documented them as meticulously as I did the large transfers. Suspense built gradually. It wasn't a sudden storm, but a careful layering of proof. During this period, I refined the narrative I would later present. Each receipt, each email, each overlooked transfer was more than a document. It was a demonstration of pattern, intent, and consequence. For example, March 28th's ledger entry, $3,200 misapplied. March 9th vendor miscommunication. March 21st bounced check. All linked in sequence. The dual identity allowed me to discuss these details freely with allies without exposing myself. Conversations with my legal advisor happened under Metcalf advisory, and they were meticulous, confirmed dates, amounts, recipients. I instructed double-check every timestamp. Every error must be undeniable. Near misses remained constant. On March 30th, she nearly recognized me during a networking lunch. I was at the table with my consultant Alias, discussing unrelated mergers, and her glance crossed the room. For a fleeting second, our eyes locked. I pretended to be engrossed in my notes, sipping a latte, nodding occasionally to the conversation. My heart hammered, but outwardly I was composed. Each narrow escape reinforced the stakes and sharpened my focus. One false move, one slip of identity, could unravel weeks of meticulous preparation. By April 1st, my insider had provided confirmation of minor misstatements in her public filings. Contracts double-booked, payment schedules misaligned, subtle discrepancies in board reports, all carefully documented. Each small oversight, once pieced together, formed a chain impossible to dismiss. I cross-checked each document's signature verification, bank timestamps, email headers, and internal notes. By April 4th, the ledger had grown into a comprehensive map of errors, misstatements, and mismanagement, all tied directly to the ex-wife's decisions and actions. April 5th was circled on the calendar. The day my second victory would formally begin. Every move before it, from March 18th to April 4th, had been preparation, observation, cataloging, near misses, and evidence gathering. That day would mark the start of a public, undeniable proof of competence and foresight. My dual identity had allowed me to operate without scrutiny, to monitor her actions, and to accumulate a body of evidence both legally solid and socially compelling. Late on April 4th, I sat in my apartment, Elliott Bay, stretching silver beneath the rain. I reviewed the ledger payments, mismanaged transfers, receipts, emails, call logs. Each piece was filed meticulously. The dual identity had worked flawlessly, allowing me access to insider information without exposure. My ex-wife's overconfidence, combined with her disregard for minor details, had created the perfect path. I traced the $3,200 misapplied deposit again, the $5,600 oversight, the $12,400 transfer, noting how each threaded into the broader narrative. As night fell, the rain tapping softly against the windows, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the calm certainty of preparation, the sting of her mockery. The whispered fluke had transformed into strategy. I had mapped every misstep, secured every piece of evidence, and rehearsed my moves carefully under the guise of my consulting identity. The suspense had been built not in a single dramatic reveal, but in the steady, methodical accumulation of proof. When April 5th arrived, the second victory would unfold like clockwork. I allowed myself a private, quiet smile. Every crumpled receipt, every time-stamped email, every minor oversight was part of a plan no one could anticipate. Dual identity had been risky, but risk had been necessary. The patience, the observation, the meticulous documentation. This was the path from humiliation to undeniable vindication. And in the quiet hum of my apartment, the city lights reflecting in the rain-slicked bay, I whispered almost reverently, "They mocked me, but now I watch, and I wait." By April 5th, the city of Seattle had begun to feel like a stage perfectly set for my quiet orchestration. I woke before sunrise, the mist rising off Elliott Bay, and immediately reviewed the ledger I had been building since the victory party. Every crumpled receipt, bounced check, misapplied transfer, and overlooked contract clause had its place. Today, the first stage of strategic action would begin, subtle, precise, and undetectable. My first target, a misdirected payment of $3,200. The ex-wife had assumed it had cleared the bank, but I had confirmed with my insider that it remained unallocated in an obsolete account. I called my legal advisor under the Metcalf advisory alias. Voice steady, measured, ensure the payment notice is corrected immediately. Double-check the accounting logs, but do not alert her office. We need natural unfolding, the advisor confirmed. Action initiated, compliant with legal parameters and traceable in the ledger. By mid-morning, I executed the next maneuver. A $5,600 payment for vendor services had been double-booked due to a clerical error in her administrative office. Using my insider's tip, I ensured it was officially documented but allowed the error to cascade slightly. The goal was subtle destabilization, not chaos, just pressure. Every correction she had to make would be visible in future audits. Each minor adjustment would build the narrative of oversight and mismanagement without direct interference. I reviewed contracts she had recently signed. 2 key agreements were vulnerable, clauses regarding project timelines and milestone payments. The first, a March 12th contract, included a clause specifying vendor deadlines tied to performance bonuses. My insider confirmed she had miscalculated her own delivery schedule. The second, a March 15th subcontract, had an overlooked termination provision favoring early performance corrections. I noted both in my ledger, highlighting dates, clause numbers, and potential leverage. As the afternoon light spilled through the apartment windows, I coordinated with my PI. Evidence had to be naturally corroborated. Photos of her office documents, timestamps of her assistant's email confirmations, and minor call recordings were all cataloged. One recording, a brief discussion with her board associate on April 3rd, revealed an unguarded comment. Mateo's win was lucky, but we'll see how long it lasts. I smiled. The irony was delicious. Every word would one day support the narrative of her mismanagement and social misjudgment. Throughout the day, I monitored reactions from her office indirectly, social whispers, minor delays in project approvals, and hints of frustration surfaced naturally. Each micro event was logged date, time, witness if applicable, and linked to the ledger. Even small interactions with colleagues were noted. A subtle delay in a vendor response on April 5th caused by the $3,200 misallocation was now documented in sequence with the earlier $5,600 misbooking. Layer by layer, the proof built itself. By evening, I moved on to double booking contracts, the next phase of chess-like strategy. Two minor service agreements, both due in the same week, were slightly misaligned in terms of delivery dates. I ensured all legal communications were complete and verifiable, but allowed the overlaps to occur without direct interference. The goal was suspense. She would feel pressure, colleagues would notice discrepancies, and I would maintain plausible deniability. Subtle destabilization, lawful and methodical, was the only path. Dinner that night was quiet. The apartment overlooking Elliott Bay was dimly lit, rain tapping lightly against the window pane. I reviewed all evidence once more. $3,200 misapplied, $5,600 misbooking, March 12th and March 15th contract clauses, April 3rd call recording, March 17th party whispers. Each item connected naturally to the next. I made a note in the ledger, April 5th, stage 1 complete. Begin observation of cascading effects. Every micro detail was accounted for: bank slips, receipts, timestamps, and internal email confirmations. Near 10 p.m., I conducted a final review of the day's subtle dominoes. Her board interactions had begun showing signs of minor stress, delayed approvals, hesitant communication, and unguarded remarks in passing. All observable, all naturally occurring, all documented. Even small mistakes, an overlooked memo or misfiled report, became leverage when connected to the larger sequence of events. I updated the ledger April 5th, 9:48 p.m. All Stage 1 missteps verified, evidence secured. Before sleep, I considered the psychological impact. The public humiliation at the victory party was still fresh in memory, but now my influence extended silently. Each mismanaged payment, each overlooked clause, each natural ripple in her workflow reinforced a chain of proof that could not be dismissed. Chess moves in motion, subtle, lawful, and untraceable. I leaned back, letting the city's reflections on the wet bay wash over me. I whispered to myself, almost reverently, every piece falls exactly where it belongs, unseen but inevitable. As night deepened, I checked all digital backups, cloud-stored receipts, encrypted email copies, photo evidence, and ensured the ledger was synchronized across multiple secure devices. Any accidental deletion or oversight would be catastrophic. I traced every document to a physical copy in my office safe. Redundant, yes, but precision demanded it. March 17th to April 5th. Every entry consistent, every micro-event aligned. The groundwork for the eventual public showdown was complete. Before closing my laptop, I reviewed my near misses over the past weeks. March 30th, lunch encounter. March 21st, bounce check. March 17th, party whispers. All survived scrutiny, all unexposed, all documented. Dual identity remained intact. My ex-wife remained unaware of the surveillance, the insider tips, and the slowly accumulating proof of her missteps. The suspense was intentional. The reveal would be undeniable. As I finally prepared for sleep, Elliott Bay shimmered under the moonlight, rain continuing its rhythmic tapping. I reflected on the day's orchestration. Every overlooked payment, every misaligned contract, every subtle pressure point would converge in the weeks to come. My victory was no longer merely a hidden check in a pocket. It was a system, a network of proof, strategy, and lawful manipulation. And soon it would culminate in a public, undeniable affirmation of foresight, patience, and justice. April 6th dawned with the gray drizzle typical of Seattle spring. I awoke early, the city mist drifting across Elliott Day, painting the skyline in soft silver. The ledger lay open on my desk, receipts and emails scattered like carefully arranged dominoes. Today was the next phase: subtle leaks, minor ethical violations, whispers that would ripple through her professional circle without revealing my hand. Each move needed to feel accidental, natural, and unavoidable. First, I verified the $12,600 bounced check from her March project. The PI had documented the correspondence emails from her assistant timestamped March 21st, noting bank rejection and a quick follow-up confirming the funds remained outstanding. I updated the ledger April 6th, 8:43 a.m. A check anomaly recorded. Evidence verified. This minor financial misstep, once public, would amplify the pattern already forming from earlier misapplied transfers. Next, I ensured that the overlooked $3,200 and $5,600 payments subtly resurfaced in her office correspondence. By sending innocuous reminders to her assistants under the guise of routine clarification, I triggered minor delays naturally. Each interaction was documented: date, time, recipient, email content, and any response. My goal was not to force errors, but to let them unfold organically, leaving her unaware that I was orchestrating the chain of events. Whispers began spreading in her professional network. A brief exchange on April 6th at a mid-morning vendor conference was overheard and recorded. Her associate murmured, "I think Matteo knew this would happen." I smiled privately. Every accidental slip reinforced the narrative of oversight without exposing my hand. Each whisper, each conversation was a silent lever, pushing toward an inevitable revelation. By noon, I focused on minor ethical lapses she had already committed but were easily overlooked: a delayed submission to a partner firm, incomplete disclosure in board memos, and subtle inconsistencies in her email confirmations became threads in the ledger. I documented them all. April 6th, 11:18 a. Mo discrepancy, partner notice. Cross-referenced with prior transfers and contracts. Each small lapse strengthened the chain of evidence. At 2:15 p.m., I received a tip from my corporate insider. One of her board associates had mentioned an internal misalignment in a vendor payment schedule. The $15,400 transfer previously overlooked now fit into a sequence confirming multiple oversights. I cross-referenced the transfer against earlier misapplied amounts: $3,200, $5,600, $12,600, and the ledger began resembling an intricate web of errors. Each data point was logged meticulously, with supporting documentation, screenshots, email headers, bank confirmations, timestamps. April 6th evening brought the near miss I had been anticipating. She attended a gala under the pretense of celebrating a minor company milestone. I was present, concealed under my consulting identity, observing from across the room. Our eyes met briefly, just a flicker, but I remained engrossed in conversation with a minor client. She paused, almost registering recognition, then smiled politely and moved on. My heart thumped, adrenaline spiked, but I maintained composure. Each near recognition tightened the tension, each subtle glance feeding the suspense of the unfolding plan. By 7 p.m., minor leaks began to show results. Emails regarding overdue payments were quietly forwarded to the accounting team, highlighting discrepancies she had ignored. A $5,600 misallocation prompted an internal discussion that she handled defensively, revealing both frustration and a lack of awareness. I documented every interaction: email timestamps, participants, content. The minor errors were becoming social and administrative ripples, all converging toward a legal and public narrative. I reviewed the ledger late that night, from March 17th's party whispers to April 6th internal discussions. Every event was connected, time-stamped and corroborated by physical or digital proof. The dual identity had allowed me to operate freely, coordinating tips from insiders, reminders to her assistants, and subtle nudges without detection. The psychological impact was evident. Small mistakes once overlooked were now visible to colleagues. Her confidence was waning, and the pattern of oversights would soon be undeniable. Around 10:30 p.m., I compiled audio recordings from the PI. One brief clip captured a conversation between her and an associate. I don't know why he's still a problem. We covered everything. The irony was thick. Every oversight I had documented directly contradicted her assertion. I filed the recording in the ledger, noting date, time, and participant details. Each piece of evidence, minor though it seemed, contributed to the tapestry I was weaving, a chain no one could dispute once the final reveal occurred. Before sleep, I reviewed the day's subtle orchestration. April 6th had been about whispers, natural leaks, and minor ethical lapses. Not dramatic interventions, but a slow tightening of pressure. Each payment, misaligned contract, and overlooked memo had been nudged into visibility in a manner consistent with normal operations. Her missteps were becoming self-revealing, and colleagues' observations would serve as unbiased corroboration. I reflected on the stakes. Every action, every ledger entry, every note from my PI and insider was designed to demonstrate foresight and precision. Public humiliation at the March 17th victory party had been only the opening act. Now the evidence was accumulating, minor mistakes compounding into undeniable proof of her oversights. The $3,200 and $5,600 misallocated payments, the $12,600 bounced check, the overlooked $15,400 transfer, all pieces of a legal and social narrative that would culminate in a controlled public revelation. As midnight approached, I ensured all digital backups were synchronized. Cloud storage, encrypted folders, physical receipts in the office safe, all meticulously verified. The dual identity remained secure. The whispers, leaks, and minor lapses had done their work. By April 7th, I would continue monitoring, but April 6th marked the successful implementation of Stage 2. Every minor error was now documented, every misstep traceable, and every ripple calculated. Leaning back in my chair, the bay lights flickering through rain-streaked windows, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The whispers had begun to echo. The leaks had begun to flow, and the stage for the next phase of public vindication was steadily taking shape. Every step was lawful, precise, and inevitable. The silent chessboard was in motion, and my ex-wife had unknowingly advanced her own pieces into positions I would later expose. April 7th began gray and damp, the usual Seattle drizzle brushing the city like a slow drumbeat. From my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, I watched the morning light filter through the mist and considered the chain of events that had unfolded since March 17th. Each crumpled receipt, bounced check, and misapplied transfer had become part of a ledger I meticulously maintained. Stage 1 and 2 had done their work. Payments were misdirected, contracts double-booked, ethical lapses, exposed subtly, whispers and leaks, rippling naturally through her professional circle. Today the edges of the storm would sharpen. By 8:15 a.m., I reviewed the updated ledger. April 6th had added multiple layers of evidence. Minor contract discrepancies, overlooked payments, and subtle miscommunications. Each item had been verified through the PI, internal corporate insider, or legal advisor. I noted specifically the $3,200 misallocation, the $5,600 double booking, the $12,600 bounce check, and the $15,400 transfer. Each piece fit perfectly into the chain of mistakes she had unwittingly created. The first call of the day was to my PI. "Any new observations from her office?" I asked, voice steady, even calm. "Yes," came the reply. April 7th, 7:50 a.m. She was already addressing emails about overdue transfers. Internal staff mentioned unusual delays with approvals. Some visible frustration noted, nothing overt, but consistent with previous oversights. I documented the timestamp, participants, and context immediately in the ledger. Every minor reaction mattered. These small fissures would later reinforce the narrative of her mismanagement. By 10 a.m., I had begun cross-referencing public filings and board communications. A misstatement in a March 31st financial memo was highlighted, $8,400 misapplied between two projects. The corporate insider confirmed the discrepancy was likely unnoticed by her team. I recorded the evidence, memo screenshot, timestamp, internal note. My dual identity allowed me to communicate with advisors and insiders freely, analyzing every subtle move without detection. At 11:30 a.m., another near miss occurred. I attended a casual networking event under my consulting alias. She appeared speaking with a mid-level associate. Our eyes met briefly. For a split second, recognition flared. I kept my head down, pretending to adjust my portfolio notes. She smiled politely, then turned away. My pulse quickened, but outwardly I remained composed. Each close call reinforced the stakes. My dual identity had to remain airtight. Lunch passed quietly. I reviewed recent call logs and emails for April 7th. Minor ethical lapses were documented, delayed vendor approvals, overlooked contract clauses, and incomplete email confirmations. I added them to the ledger with timestamps and evidence files, emails, receipts, call summaries. These small but verifiable lapses were accumulating into a pattern that could not be dismissed. By mid-afternoon, April 7th became a study in subtle social pressure. A $5,600 payment misalignment from March 18th now caused a minor internal conflict. Her assistant noted the error in a casual email to the board, inadvertently documenting it for future leverage. I captured the email screenshot, time-stamped April 7th, 2:14 p.m., and added a note in the ledger, indirect self-disclosure of oversight. Small natural reactions like these were critical evidence that the missteps were not isolated but part of a continuing chain. At 3:45 p.m., I reviewed the internal reactions to the $12,600 bounce check. An associate had emailed her requesting clarification. She responded defensively, revealing frustration and lack of oversight. Again, I recorded every detail, date, time, recipient, and exact phrasing. Each minor slip, each natural reaction layered additional proof that could later be presented legally and publicly. The late afternoon brought subtle social monitoring. My insider reported a whispered comment from a board associate. Seems like her recent projects are creating more internal confusion than progress. I logged it April 7th, 4:22 p.m. Context noted, these whispers naturally occurring would be invaluable in illustrating the pattern of oversight and the resulting pressure on her credibility. By 7 p.m., the apartment overlooked Elliott Bay again, rain softly tapping the windows. I reviewed the day's observations, misallocated $3,200 and $5,600 payments. $12,600 bounce check, $15,400 transfer, minor contract misstatements, defensive emails, whispered internal commentary. Every element meticulously documented with time, context, and supporting evidence. The edges of the storm were now clearly visible. The pressure I had applied, subtly but relentlessly, was shaping her reactions, creating a self-reinforcing narrative. Evening brought final review. I synchronized digital backups, encrypted folders, and physical receipts in my safe. Dual identity secure. Ledger updated, every observation cross-referenced. My ex-wife remained unaware that each minor misstep, each whisper, each leaked detail was being carefully documented and linked to prior events. Suspense, patiently cultivated over weeks, had now reached a critical point. I took a glass of whiskey to the bay window, reflecting on the slow orchestration. Each misstep was small, each leak minor, yet collectively they formed an undeniable chain. My March 17th humiliation, the whispered fluke, had evolved into a meticulously documented sequence. A storm gathering edges, and by April 28th, in the courtroom, each thread would be visible, undeniable, and strategically placed. The rain tapped steadily against the glass as I whispered to myself, every reaction, every slip, every shadow of oversight, they build the storm, and when it breaks, justice will be clear. I leaned back, letting the city lights reflect in the bay, and felt a quiet satisfaction. Stage 3 would continue, but the foundation, the subtle pressure, the minor errors, and the whispered missteps was complete. The edges of the storm had sharpened, and the path toward courtroom vindication was now unavoidable. April 28th arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle, Seattle's hallmark spring weather framing the day like a somber prelude. I arrived at the courtroom early, 8:15 a.m., coffee in hand, briefcase containing the ledger, receipts, screenshots, and recordings meticulously organized. Each piece of evidence, $3,200 misapplied payment, $5,600 double book transfer, $12,600 bounced check, $15,400 overlooked transfer, was referenced in precise chronological order. Today, the culmination of 6 weeks of methodical planning would unfold. The courthouse buzzed quietly with staff and attendees. I observed the gallery, noting who might react, who might whisper, and who would later serve as witnesses to the subtle pattern I had cultivated. My ex-wife entered at 8:45 a.m., composed but tense. Her practiced smile masked the subtle tremor I could detect, the slight tightening of her jaw. Every misstep, every minor oversight from March to April would now converge in an environment where timing and presentation mattered more than any whisper or small error. The proceedings began at 9 a.m. I took my seat, ledger at the ready. My legal advisor, aware of the full sequence of events and my dual identity, subtly nodded. The initial motions addressed procedural points, giving the room a rhythm of mundane legalities. But beneath the surface, each small document I had collected over the past 6 weeks was a silent weapon. The first motion to enter evidence referenced the misapplied $3,200 payment from March 18th. The judge, mid-40s, glanced at the ledger and nodded. I could feel the tension building, not in the room but in the weight of the moment. At 10:05 a.m., the first piece of evidence was submitted, the crumpled $42,000 check from March 17th, hidden in plain sight for 6 weeks. I presented it calmly. Your Honor, this check represents a completed transaction that my client was fully entitled to, yet public statements and professional behavior by the opposing party have undermined its recognition. The judge examined the document, noting the date, signature, and amount. In the gallery, murmurs rose subtly. I caught my ex-wife's glance, her eyes widening just enough to betray a flicker of anxiety. Next, I introduced the sequence of minor misallocations. Each payment, each misapplied transfer, each overlooked contract clause was submitted with accompanying evidence. Bank statements, emails, timestamps, $5,600 double booked, $12,600 bounced, $15,400 overlooked. Each document slid onto the courtroom table with deliberate care. The rustle of paper, the clicking of digital files being submitted to the clerk, created an auditory rhythm of accountability. Every evidence point was undeniable and verifiable. At 10:45 a.m., a recording was played. Her conversation from April 3rd, captured by the PI, was audible throughout the courtroom. Mateo's win was lucky, but we'll see how long it lasts. The room absorbed the words. A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. My ex-wife's composure wavered for a heartbeat, eyes darting, fingers tightening around her notes. I remained calm, observing, noting each micro-reaction, lips pursed, shoulders stiffening, subtle flush across her cheeks. Suspense built carefully over weeks, now manifested in her own responses. By 11:15 a.m., email evidence reinforced the pattern. Multiple mismanaged transfers, defensive replies to inquiries, and offhand remarks were laid before the court. Screenshots, printed copies, and ledger annotations created a seamless chronological narrative. March 17th, party mockery. March 21st, bounced $12,600. Check April 6th, whispers and minor ethical lapses. April 7th, cumulative responses. Every email, every timestamp, every subtle social ripple was tied together. The evidence formed a story, legally undeniable, meticulously documented, and impossible to dismiss as coincidence. At 11:50 a.m., I presented the near misses and natural reactions. Reports from the PI and corporate insider detailed her subtle responses to reminders, internal misalignments, and social cues. Every minor stress point, delays in approvals, defensive emails, whispered comments by associates, was documented with timestamp and context. The effect was cumulative, a clear picture of oversight, reaction, and the inevitability of error. The gallery leaned in subtly, the rhythm of suspense echoing in the room. Lunchtime passed. I reviewed the evidence with my legal advisor quietly, ensuring all entries were referenced in proper order by 1 p.m. We resumed. I introduced the last series of documents tying all minor missteps together. The $3,200, $5,600, $12,600, $15,400, March 12th contract clause, March 15th termination provision, all cross-referenced in chronological sequence. Each document was verifiable, backed by receipts, emails, or call recordings. The legal narrative was airtight. By 1:45 p.m., the gallery could sense tension. My ex-wife, once confident, now shifted in her seat. A colleague leaned closer, whispering, and she responded with forced politeness. Her subtle reactions, tight jaw, flickering eyes, hurried notes, spoke louder than any arguments she could make. Each natural lapse, each involuntary expression, became evidence of the pattern I had meticulously built. At 2:30 p.m., I presented the final piece. The March 17th party evidence, eyewitness statements, and photographic proof of the whispered fluke, combined with crumpled check and ledger annotations, created the full narrative. The juxtaposition of public mockery and private proof created a crescendo of suspense. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every witness leaned forward, every attendee absorbed the sequence. By 3:10 p.m., the subtle murmurs transformed into visible reactions. My ex-wife's lips pressed tightly together. She glanced at her notes repeatedly, trying to reconstruct an explanation. I observed silently, noting micro-expressions, documenting in my mind the culmination of 6 weeks of careful orchestration. The suspense, the anticipation, the inevitability all converged. The judge, reviewing the final documents, nodded in acknowledgement of the meticulous, verifiable, and legally coherent evidence. My legal advisor gave a slight, satisfied nod. I allowed myself a measured exhale. The public humiliation of March 17th had been avenged not through impulsive display but through patience, foresight, and lawful cunning. Every payment, every contract clause, every whisper, every minor lapse had been strategically collected and presented. At 3:45 p.m., the final statements were made. The documented sequence demonstrates pattern, oversight, and verifiable consequence. I said calmly, "It is not coincidence. It is lawful accountability and undeniable proof of management errors that cannot be ignored." The courtroom absorbed the words. My ex-wife shifted again, face pale, realizing the inevitability. By 4 p.m., the judge concluded the hearing. Evidence fully accepted, narrative verified, reactions documented. The courtroom echoed with silent understanding. The fluke mocked at the victory party had transformed into undeniable proof of foresight, patience, and strategic action. The suspense, nurtured over weeks, had reached its apex. As I stepped out of the courtroom into the Seattle drizzle, ledger and documents secure in my briefcase, I felt the weight of weeks of meticulous orchestration lift. Each crumpled receipt, bounced check, misapplied transfer, email, and whispered reaction had served its purpose. Justice had been measured, lawful, and precise. The storm I had cultivated, the whispers, leaks, minor errors, had revealed itself in a public, undeniable conclusion. Leaning against the courthouse steps, the rain running down my jacket, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The city shimmered, misted in silver, reflecting my calm satisfaction. Today had been about more than financial oversight or public humiliation. It was proof, patience, lawfulness, and strategy wielded greater power than mockery or arrogance ever could. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I whispered to myself, "They laughed at me once. Today, every piece fell exactly where it belonged." April 29th began with a quiet tension that stretched across Seattle like a heavy fog. The courtroom battle of the previous day had left traces in every corridor, whispered conversations circulating among her associates, colleagues, and even friends. I awoke in my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, the city slick with rain, and opened the ledger once more. Every crumpled receipt, email, and time-stamped recording now bore a new weight. They had culminated in undeniable consequence. By 8 a.m., the news had begun trickling in. Colleagues of my ex-wife noted delays in her board communications, and subtle murmurs suggested shaken confidence. A minor misstatement in her April filings, previously overlooked, now carried far greater significance under the scrutiny of yesterday's courtroom revelations. The $3,200 and $5,600 payments, the $12,600 bounce check, and the $15,400 transfer were no longer minor errors. They were part of an irrefutable chain, corroborated by evidence she could not refute. By mid-morning, my insider reported the first tangible fallout. Her privileges on two keyboards were suspended temporarily, pending review of her oversight in financial reporting. She had been blindsided, not by a single mistake, but by the cumulative weight of lawful evidence. I noted the date, April 29th, 9:47 a.m., and details of the suspension in the ledger. Each step, each consequence had been anticipated, but the timing still brought a private satisfaction. Justice, measured and precise, was unfolding exactly as planned. I walked through my apartment, coffee in hand, reviewing the nuances of the past weeks. The whispers at the March 17th victory party, the subtle misapplied payments, the minor ethical lapses and near misses were no longer theoretical. They had tangible effects. Staff who had once overlooked her errors now referenced the documented chain of mismanagement. Emails forwarded inadvertently highlighted past oversights. Minor social cues she had once dismissed now reflected the credibility of the evidence presented in court. The echoes of consequence reverberated naturally, without any overt action from me. At 11:15 a.m., a message from my legal advisor confirmed additional board reactions. Colleagues and associates had begun discussing the pattern of errors openly, noting that the March 17th fluke remark no longer seemed like an isolated jab. It was the opening act of a much larger narrative. The ledger captured these reports. Timestamp, observer, summary of comments. The pattern of oversight had now achieved a social and professional resonance beyond the courtroom. By noon, I reflected on her psychological state. My ex-wife, once poised and confident, now displayed subtle signs of stress. Tight jawlines in video calls, hurried email responses, and avoidance of direct meetings. Her minor missteps had compounded under observation, creating a natural chain of accountability that I had carefully allowed to develop. Each reaction, though subtle, was recorded in the ledger, April 29th, 11:45 a.m. Behavior observation noted, corroborated with internal reports. The suspense of control had now shifted into visible, tangible consequence. Lunch passed quietly. I reviewed all physical documents, receipts, and screenshots again. Even small errors, once insignificant, now bore amplified weight. The $3,200 and $5,600 payments, previously minor misallocations, now were referenced in internal discussions about her oversight. The $12,600 bounce check was discussed in casual office conversation, subtly reinforcing the narrative of repeated mismanagement. I documented each reference meticulously, noting observer, date, and context. Every ripple of consequence was accounted for. By mid-afternoon, the social and professional echo became more evident. I received confirmation from my insider that colleagues were now questioning her judgment in strategic meetings. One remark, overheard by my PI during a casual conversation on April 29th, illustrated this. It's surprising how repeated errors have gone unnoticed. One would think better oversight existed. I logged the observer, time, and context, highlighting the natural amplification of her earlier missteps. Late afternoon brought the first public reflection. Minor press coverage noted board suspensions and subtle operational delays. Quotes from associates emphasized the accumulation of errors and mismanagement. I carefully filed these clippings in the ledger, noting publication, time, and date. Each public acknowledgement, however small, validated the careful strategy I had executed. Patience, lawful evidence, and precise orchestration. By 6 p.m., I walked along the rain-slick streets near Elliott Bay, briefcase in hand, reflecting on the orchestration of consequences. The fluke she had mocked at the victory party had become a documented pattern, leaving no room for doubt. Whispers, minor ethical lapses, misapplied payments, all converged into a lawful, undeniable affirmation of foresight and strategic planning. The storm I had nurtured over 6 weeks had expanded naturally into social, professional, and psychological consequences. Evening arrived. and the city lights shimmered in the wet streets. I reviewed the final updates for the day. Suspended privileges, internal office discussions, minor press coverage, behavioral observations. Each event was meticulously recorded. April 29th, 7:15 p.m. Source and context. The echoes of consequence were fully realized. Every piece of evidence I had accumulated, every subtle move I had orchestrated, now spoke louder than any words I could have offered publicly. I allowed myself a quiet, reflective moment. Sitting by the bay window, the rain tapping gently against the glass, I thought about the precision required to reach this stage. The court had accepted the evidence, my dual identity remained secure, and the public and professional consequences had begun to ripple outward naturally. Justice had not been rash, cruel, or impulsive. It had been measured, lawful, and inevitable. By 10 p.m., I closed the ledger for the day. Physical receipts were safely stored in my office. Safe digital backups were synchronized and encrypted. The evidence from March 17th through April 29th remained unassailable. The ex-wife's professional fallout, social discomfort, and psychological unease were the natural outcomes of her own missteps, made visible through meticulous documentation and patient orchestration. The echoes of consequence had been realized without a single overt confrontation. As midnight approached, I sipped whiskey, reflecting on the past 6 weeks. Every misapplied payment, bounced check, minor contract error, and whispered observation had contributed to this state of undeniable lawful accountability. The storm I had cultivated, the suspense, the leaks, the calculated pressure, had reached a subtle but clear peak, and yet, in its quiet aftermath, I found the satisfaction of control, patience, and strategic foresight. I whispered to myself, almost reverently, as I watched the rain shimmer over the bay. Every misstep has its echo. Every shadow of oversight eventually finds its reflection, and today the reflection is clear. April 30th, 2025, dawned clear and brisk over Seattle. The rain from the previous days had left the streets polished, reflections of sunlight dancing in puddles like scattered currency. I sat at my desk, Elliott Bay stretching out beyond the windows, the crumpled $42,000 check resting in my palm. That check had been the seed of the plan, and now it represented the culmination of measured, lawful justice. I began the day by reviewing the ledger one final time. Every misapplied payment, bounced check, overlooked transfer, and contract discrepancy from March 17th through April 29th was accounted for. The $3,200 misallocation, $5,600 double booking, $12,600 bounce check, and $15,400 overlooked transfer, all meticulously recorded with dates, times, participants, and corroborating evidence. Each entry linked seamlessly into the chain, proving professional oversight, mismanagement, and, ultimately, vindication. By 9 a.m., I contacted the bank to verify all recovered funds and correct remaining discrepancies. Each transfer had been rectified, each error logged and confirmed. The $3,200, $5,600, and $15,400 amounts were reconciled and now reflected accurately in accounts. I ensured receipts were printed, signatures verified, and timestamps confirmed. Lawful, precise, and undeniable, every financial ripple had been accounted for. Around 10:15 a.m., I reviewed contracts finalized during the March-April period. Minor corrections had been implemented, ethical lapses documented, and misalignments corrected under supervision. My legal advisor confirmed each adjustment met regulatory and corporate standards. The ledger now contained both proof of prior oversights and the confirmation of their resolution. Justice, measured and precise, was now fully tangible. By noon, I prepared for symbolic closure. The crumpled $42,000 check, once hidden in my pocket at the victory party, was placed in a protective sleeve, documented and archived. Every fold, crease, and annotation became part of the ledger. March 17th receipt, April 28th courtroom submission, April 29th fallout documentation, and April 30th reconciliation. This single piece of paper represented not only financial restitution, but the methodical orchestration of a 6-week strategy executed with foresight and patience. Lunch passed quietly. I revisited the email chains, verifying that all minor ethical violations had been addressed, payments reconciled, and oversight clarified with associates. Any potential gaps had been sealed, cross-referenced with PI reports and insider confirmations. By 1:30 p.m., I could confidently confirm that all actionable consequences from her oversights had been realized. The chain of events was complete. By mid-afternoon, I considered the broader implications. My ex-wife's professional credibility had been restored to baseline levels, but the pattern of her prior errors had been documented and recorded legally. Board associates, colleagues, and internal auditors had access to the evidence, which was now beyond dispute. While there was no desire for public cruelty, the ledger and verified documents ensured accountability and the natural consequences of oversight. Each ripple had achieved its measured end. At 3 p.m., I reviewed the final sequence in the ledger. All misapplied payments, bounced checks, overlooked transfers, minor ethical lapses, and subtle internal communications were cross-referenced. The final confirmation: each error had been documented, verified, and reconciled. Financial closure had been achieved. Symbolically, the crumpled $42,000 check remained a token, a reminder that measured, lawful strategy could turn humiliation into undeniable vindication. By 4 p.m., I reflected on the nature of justice applied. Revenge had not been rash or emotional. Every step had been planned, lawful, and precise. Every payment, transfer, and contract adjustment had been recorded with proof. Each minor leak, whisper, and oversight had been documented in the ledger, forming a chain that could be legally presented without exaggeration. The measured execution ensured both personal satisfaction and ethical propriety. Evening approached. I walked briefly along the waterfront, the water reflecting the fading light. The city shimmered, each ripple a reminder of the weeks of preparation and observation. Every documented misstep, every minor ethical violation, and every overlooked payment had been addressed, verified, and resolved. The storm that began with whispered mockery at the March 17th victory party had been transformed into lawful, precise, and undeniable accountability. Returning to the apartment, I placed the crumpled $42,000 check into a sealed archival folder alongside all receipts, contracts, and electronic backups. Each item was cross-referenced with ledger entries, timestamps, and annotations. I allowed myself a quiet smile. Justice had been achieved not through impulsive confrontation, but through foresight, strategy, and lawful execution. By 9:30 p.m., I reviewed the ledger one final time, March 17th through April 30th. Every misapplied payment, bounced check, overlooked transfer, contract clause, and ethical lapse had been reconciled. Each entry reinforced the narrative of careful observation, patient planning, and lawful consequence. The chain of events had been fully documented, and the outcome was absolute. Before sleep, I reflected quietly with a glass of whiskey in hand, looking out over Elliott Bay. The March 17th humiliation, the whispered fluke, had become a catalyst for precise, measured justice. Each step of the plan, every minor oversight leveraged lawfully, and every whisper, leak, and reaction had contributed to a final, undeniable resolution. I whispered softly to myself, "Measured justice is quiet, precise, and inevitable. Every piece matters, every ripple counts, and patience turns vindication into proof." The crumpled $42,000 check rested safely beside the ledger, a symbol of foresight, preparation, and lawful retribution. Financial closure, public accountability, and personal satisfaction had all been achieved. The storm had passed, leaving only clarity, structure, and precise triumph. May 1st, 2025, dawned calm over Seattle. The rain had finally ceased, leaving the streets in Elliott Bay gleaming under early sunlight. I sat in my apartment, the city stretched before me like a mosaic of silver reflections. The crumpled $42,000 check rested on the desk beside the ledger, each receipt, email, and timestamp a silent witness to the past 6 weeks. Today was not about action, it was about reflection. I poured a glass of whiskey, letting the amber liquid catch the morning light. My eyes traced the ledger entries: March 17th victory party, March 18th, April 4th dual identity operations, April 5th, 7 subtle misdirected payments, leaks, and minor ethical lapses, April 28th courtroom revelation, April 29th fallout, April 30th measured closure. Each step had been deliberate, lawful, and precise. Every whisper, glance, and misapplied transfer had been accounted for. The orchestration was complete, and now only quiet reflection remained. I thought of the March 17th party. The fluke whispered in front of friends, the laughter that cut sharper than any blade. That moment of humiliation had sparked patience, foresight, and planning. Each action following it had been deliberate, a series of lawful moves designed to ensure accountability without cruelty. The $3,200 misapplied payment, the $5,600 double booking, the $12,600 bounced check, the $15,400 overlooked transfer, all were symbols of oversight transformed into lawful resolution. I leaned back, Elliott Bay stretching silver beneath the morning sun, and reflected on the emotional journey. Humiliation had been real, acute, and personal. Pride had been challenged, professional credibility questioned, and social perception threatened. Yet each step, calculated and patient, transformed the sting into clarity. Strategy replaced emotion, foresight replaced impulse. Every ledger entry, every time stamp, every corroborated email reinforced the fact that revenge, when lawful and deliberate, was indistinguishable from justice. I revisited the dual identity, the Metcalf advisory persona that had allowed me access to insider information, minor ethical lapses, and corporate oversights. Each near miss, each careful observation of my ex-wife's natural reactions had been a lesson in patience. The gala on March 30th, the luncheon near Pike Place on April 1st, subtle glances during internal meetings, every fleeting moment had been leveraged ethically and without detection. The orchestration was complete, every domino precisely aligned. By mid-morning, I reviewed the ledger one final time, March 17th through April 30th. Each entry cross-referenced, time-stamped, and backed by receipts, emails, call logs, or insider reports. Financial closure was fully realized, with misapplied payments reconciled. Minor ethical lapses had been documented, addressed, and resolved in accordance with law. Professional accountability was reinforced, and the public and social narrative had shifted naturally. The crumpled check remained on the desk, symbolic of patience, foresight, and methodical execution. I traced its folds with my finger, recalling the moment it had rested in my pocket during the victory party. The moment her mockery cut deepest. That same paper, now archived, represented measured, lawful triumph. It was more than currency. It was strategy made tangible, humiliation transformed into vindication. I sipped the whiskey and allowed my thoughts to drift further. Revenge had never been about cruelty. It had been about boundaries, accountability, and proof. Each minor error she had made, unapparent to casual observers but fully documented, had been leveraged ethically and precisely. The social and professional ripples she experienced were not manufactured. They were natural consequences revealed through meticulous observation and lawful action. By afternoon, the city's quiet hum provided a perfect backdrop for contemplation. I reflected on the broader implications. Patience was power, observation was insight, and lawful, deliberate action achieved results unmatched by impulsive retaliation. Every step, every entry, every minor oversight leveraged strategically had converged into a satisfying, complete resolution. The lesson was clear. Foresight and methodical planning outlast flippant mockery and impulsive judgment. As the evening sun cast long shadows across the bay, I considered the human element. Pride, social perception, and professional credibility were fragile, easily misjudged, and often amplified by minor oversights. Yet accountability, documented and lawful, created clarity, resolution, and personal peace. The echoes of the March 17th party, the whispers and minor errors had all been transformed into evidence, into proof, into undeniable justice. I finally allowed myself a private, quiet smile. The orchestration of weeks of observation, patient documentation, and strategic action had reached its logical conclusion. Financial closure, professional accountability, and personal vindication were achieved. Every crumpled receipt, bounced check, misapplied payment, and time-stamped email had been meticulously cataloged, forming a complete narrative of foresight, patience, and ethical resolution. Leaning back in my chair, whiskey in hand, I whispered aloud, the words almost reverberating off the bay windows, "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." That single line captured the essence of the journey. Every moment of humiliation had been transformed into measurable lawful justice. Every error and oversight had been observed, documented, and leveraged ethically. The storm had passed, leaving clarity, structure, and satisfaction. Silence replaced suspense, reflection replaced action, and the city shimmered quietly beneath the fading light. By 10:30 p.m., the ledger and the crumpled check were securely archived, digital backups synchronized, physical receipts safely stored, and all evidence cross-referenced. The orchestration was complete. The March 17th humiliation had been transformed into lawful vindication, patience had been rewarded, and foresight had prevailed. I leaned back, Elliott Bay shimmering under moonlight, and allowed the quiet satisfaction to settle fully. The lesson, simple but profound, lingered careful observation, ethical strategy, and measured patience always outweigh impulsive retaliation. And in the stillness of that evening, with Seattle reflected in silver beneath the bay, I understood the full scope of what I had achieved. May 2nd, 2025, dawned over Seattle with a rare calm. The streets glistened under soft sunlight, the aftermath of rain leaving puddles that reflected the city's muted energy. From my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, I observed the stillness with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The courtroom revelation had concluded, the ledger and crumpled $42,000 check securely archived, and the consequences of the past 6 weeks had unfolded exactly as intended. Today the battle was over, but the rebuilding, my own and hers, was beginning. I began the day by reviewing all correspondence from the previous week. Emails, internal board memos, and financial confirmations had been reconciled. The $3,200 misapplied payment, the $5,600 double book transfer, the $12,600 bounce check, and the $15,400 overlooked transfer were all corrected, accounted for, and documented. Each file was cross-referenced in the ledger, ensuring continuity from March 17th through May 1st. This final verification gave me a private sense of closure. Justice had been measured, lawful, and complete. By mid-morning, I reflected on the social fallout. My ex-wife, previously composed and socially assertive, had begun to retreat. Board privileges remained under temporary suspension. Colleagues were cautious in communication, and subtle whispers of accountability were circulating. Her public image was intact, but the pattern of oversight and professional misjudgment was now documented beyond dispute. The echoes of consequence from April 29th and April 30th had solidified into lasting awareness. I noted each development in the ledger, observer, date, context, and verifiable reference. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system. I sipped whiskey and reviewed minor details, internal emails confirming corrected transfers, receipts confirming reconciled payments, time-stamped evidence from the PI. Each element had contributed to the larger narrative of accountability. While the ex-wife retreated socially and professionally, I was free to rebuild quietly, privately, reflecting on the orchestration of 6 weeks of precise, lawful action. Lunch passed with a view over the bay. I reviewed the ledger one last time, confirming the sequence: March 17th party humiliation, March 18th, April 4th, dual identity observation, April 5th, 7 subtle destabilization, April 28th, courtroom revelation, April 29th, social and professional consequences, April 30th, financial closure. Each step was complete, verified, and meticulously documented. The private satisfaction of orchestrating such precision was profound. By mid-afternoon, I began to consider the personal reconstruction. With all evidence secured and accountability confirmed, I could resume routines without distraction. The storm had passed, leaving only reflection and clarity. I organized my office, verified digital backups, and ensured physical documents including the crumpled $42,000 check and receipts were archived with redundant verification. Security and accuracy were paramount. Later in the day, I reviewed subtle social indicators. Colleagues who had been indirectly influenced by the cumulative effects of her oversights continued to adjust interactions accordingly. Board meetings proceeded with cautious efficiency. Internal communications reflected careful accountability, and minor professional tensions had subsided. My orchestration of whispers, leaks, and lawful pressure had created measurable, self-reinforcing outcomes without overt confrontation. The storm had been managed, and the results remained entirely lawful. By evening, the apartment was bathed in golden light as the sun dipped toward the horizon. I reflected on the psychological dimension of the past weeks. The March 17th humiliation, the whispered fluke, the minor financial oversights, and near misses during dual identity operations had all been transformed into a pattern of verifiable accountability. Patience, foresight, and lawful strategy had turned public embarrassment into undeniable proof of professional oversight. The orchestration, complete and precise, had left only subtle echoes for others to observe. I poured a final glass of whiskey, placing it beside the crumpled check. That piece of paper, once a seed of hidden victory, had evolved into a symbol of methodical, lawful triumph. Each fold and crease now represented foresight, precision, and patience rewarded. I reviewed the ledger one last time, March 17th through May 2nd. All actions verified, all consequences accounted for. The ex-wife's retreat was not my doing, but the natural result of accountability, carefully documented and lawfully presented. As night fell, I stepped onto the balcony, Elliott Bay shimmering beneath moonlight. The city felt quiet, reflective, and in harmony with the resolution of the past weeks. I considered the balance of patience, lawful strategy, and foresight. Every crumpled receipt, misapplied payment, minor oversight, and whispered conversation had played its part in a chain that now stood indisputable. Victory had been earned, measured, and private. By 10 p.m., I returned inside, archiving the crumpled check and ledger with meticulous care. Digital backups were confirmed, physical copies secured, and all supporting evidence cross-referenced. The orchestration was fully complete. No further action was necessary. The echoes of consequence would continue to ripple naturally. My satisfaction was quiet, internal, and entirely aligned with ethical and lawful strategy. Before sleep, I reflected on the personal lesson. Revenge is not measured by public spectacle but by precision, foresight, and accountability. The March 17th humiliation had been transformed into lawful vindication. Patience and observation, coupled with ethical strategy, had turned whispers, leaks, and minor missteps into undeniable consequences. I allowed myself a private smile, understanding that the orchestration of 6 weeks of careful planning had achieved a perfect, silent victory. As the city lights shimmered on the bay, I whispered softly, "The battle is over, but the quiet triumph lasts longer than any shout of victory." May 3rd, 2025, arrived with the crisp clarity of early Seattle spring. The streets glimmered under soft sunlight, and Elliott Bay reflected a calm, silvered surface. I sat in my apartment, ledger and crumpled $42,000 check secured, reviewing the past week's orchestration. The courtroom victory, financial closure, and social fallout were complete. Today was about silent acknowledgement and private reflection, a triumph unseen yet fully realized. The morning began with a quiet cup of coffee by the bay window. I revisited the ledger entries, tracing each moment: March 17th victory party, March 18th, April 4th, dual identity observation, April 5th, 7 subtle destabilization, April 28th, courtroom revelation, April 29th, professional fallout, April 30th, financial closure, May 1st, reflection, May 2nd, private rebuilding. Each entry meticulously cross-referenced receipts, emails, call logs, and insider reports. The orchestration of justice, lawful and precise, was now complete. By 9 a.m., I reviewed minor public indicators. A mutual acquaintance, someone unaware of my dual identity operations, reached out with a congratulatory note on my perceived professional resilience. I smiled quietly. To the world, it appeared as though my victory had been earned through competence alone, without spectacle. The private orchestration remained unseen, the evidence meticulously archived, and the consequences fully realized. Silent triumph, perfectly measured. Mid-morning brought reflection on personal growth. The March 17th party humiliation, once acute and stinging, had become a catalyst for strategic foresight and patience. Every misapplied payment, minor contract error, and subtle ethical lapse had been carefully documented and presented lawfully. Each ripple, whisper, leak, reaction was leveraged ethically, resulting in a natural, verifiable chain of accountability. Private satisfaction had replaced public vengeance, and the methodical planning had ensured every consequence was measured, precise, and enduring. By noon, I reviewed correspondence confirming ongoing adjustments from prior oversight. Internal boards had reconciled minor errors, financial transfers were verified, and minor ethical lapses had been addressed. Each confirmation was logged in the ledger: date, time, observer, supporting documentation. The ex-wife's retreat continued naturally. Her social confidence diminished subtly, her professional credibility intact but thoroughly documented. Every ripple of consequence from the previous 6 weeks had landed exactly where intended. Lunch passed with quiet reflection. I revisited the crumpled $42,000 check, now symbolic of a perfectly executed plan, from a simple piece of paper in my pocket. At the March 17th party, it had become the cornerstone of measured, lawful vindication. Every crease, fold, and annotation represented foresight, patience, and meticulous planning rewarded. The ledger and accompanying evidence chronicled every step, every minor oversight leveraged ethically, and every ripple leading to undeniable consequence. By mid-afternoon, I considered subtle public acknowledgement. At a casual professional gathering, a colleague mentioned my ability to navigate complex projects with calm efficiency. I offered a modest nod and a polite smile, giving no hint of the months-long orchestration behind the scenes. The acknowledgement was public, understated, and entirely silent in its triumph. No words of vengeance, no dramatic revelation, just quiet competence, observation, and the satisfaction of foresight fulfilled. Late afternoon, I reviewed minor updates from the PI and Insider. No new missteps had occurred, but prior documentation remained secure and verifiable. Every payment, every contract, every minor ethical lapse had been addressed, reconciled, and recorded. The final threads of the orchestration were intact, reinforcing the overall narrative of measured, lawful accountability. Silent triumph was now not only emotional but documented fact. Evening brought reflection over Elliott Bay. The city shimmered beneath the soft, fading light, and the water mirrored my calm satisfaction. 6 weeks of patient observation, lawful action, and strategic orchestration had culminated in undeniable closure. Every ripple from March 17th's mockery to May 2nd's private rebuilding had been accounted for. Each receipt, email, call log, and insider report reinforced the completeness of the process. The storm had passed, leaving clarity, precision, and quiet satisfaction. By 9:30 p.m., I ensured the ledger, receipts, and crumpled check were securely archived. Digital backups were encrypted, physical copies secured, and all supporting documentation cross-referenced. The orchestration, flawless and lawful, required no further action. Victory had been earned, measured, and acknowledged silently. I poured a glass of whiskey, gazing over the bay as reflections shimmered like fragments of the past weeks. The March 17th humiliation had been transformed into methodical, lawful vindication. Every minor error, every subtle whisper, every overlooked payment had been leveraged ethically, resulting in undeniable consequences. Silence, reflection, and strategic foresight had produced a triumph far more satisfying than any public spectacle. As night settled over Seattle, I whispered softly, almost reverently, "Every silent move counts. Every patient step is proof." And sometimes the quietest victories echo the loudest. The crumpled check rested beside the ledger, symbolic of foresight, patience, and meticulous execution. Each documented misstep and subsequent resolution created a lasting testament to lawful, measured strategy. The orchestration of 6 weeks was now complete, silent, and perfect. In that quiet apartment, with city lights reflecting off the bay, I allowed myself a final private smile. The public saw competence, resilience, and calm execution. The private record held the full narrative, every whisper, leak, payment, and ethical lapse meticulously catalogued. Silent triumph was complete.